Let's try that. That works a lot better. Hey, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time it is, wherever you are, whoever you might happen to be. Welcome once again to Full Fat Spoiler Chat, the show in which we, or tonight I, of the folks at Nerd Caliber, look at a recent piece of nerdy entertainment in depth. So we talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it, tone, theme, messages, all going in detail, and to be able to do that, we spoil the show or movie or whatever it happens to be. In this case, we are going to be spoiling the recently concluded first season of the anime To Your Eternity, currently running on Crunchyroll. And that means if you have not seen To Your Eternity and you do not like spoilers, you should probably not be tuning into this particular channel while it's live anyway, until you've had a chance to go see it. If you don't mind spoilers, then absolutely. Or if you have seen it and want to comment on it in the chats and join our discussion here, absolutely, please do. I've got a lot to say about this one, so I would love to hear some other opinions on this show from people who have seen it, all the way to episode 20, the end of the current season, because we're going to be spoiling it. So what is To Your Eternity? Oh, by the way, I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber. I am first-person shooter as a cosplay photographer on Facebook, and Burley_adopter on Twitter and a couple of other places, mostly as a tech journalist. And when I say cosplay photographer, I will be back at a con this weekend for the first time in a year and a half. I'll be at Fan Expo Boston Boston, at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center, room 051 on the bottom floor, the showroom floor, on the eastern hallway near the back, where the cosplay judging will go in. Also right near where the VIP entrance is. For anybody who is going to be there, stop by, let us get your photos, if you're in cosplay, and if you're not in cosplay, just stop by and say hi. So, what is To Your Eternity? To Your Eternity is an anime based on a manga series. Its name in Japanese is Fumetsu no Anata e. Horrible Japanese, I'm sure. My apologies. In English, it's To Your Eternity. Apparently, the exact translation from Japanese is To You, the Immortal. And that's basically, that tells you something about what the story is about. Now, we covered this on one of our very first Anime Octane shows when that show launched, but only when it was like 3 episodes in. And basically to just sort of say how freaking amazing it was. So if you haven't seen that coverage, I'm afraid, or you have seen that coverage, I'm afraid I'm going to sort of rehash a little bit about what the start of the story is, and a little bit about what I thought about or still think about most of it. And I'll get this out of the way. It is an amazing piece of work with 1/3, mostly the very last 6 episodes. It's actually a block that ends just before the very last one. The last episode jumps right back up into amazement. But those episodes 14 through 19 is one of the biggest drops in every bit of quality in an anime I've ever seen. It is right up there, if not worse, because the initial part of it is so much higher in quality and of writing and story and everything else, than the second cour, the second part of Sword Art Online's first season. And we all know how that went with, the tentacles and so on. I still say this is an amazing series. I still say it's worth checking out, but I got to talk about that part and where this show went and why I think it has one of the worst second cours of any anime that's ever happened. So the story is about... It starts with a being of some sort placing a white orb, about the size of a smooth golf ball, in an Arctic-like condition on some world, where it turns into a rock, once it encounters rocks, eventually winds up having moss grow on it. No idea how long it exists as a rock, but for a very long time. And eventually a wolf, sort of domesticated wolf, comes up to the rock and is in a bad way and ultimately dies while it's in contact with the rock. And the rock finds that it's able to take on the form of the wolf. And it then goes to go follow its path back to its human, which is a boy, young teenager, with white hair, who's living all by himself in what's apparently an abandoned village, clearly inspired by Inuit or some other northern native species. Their huts have as supporting members very large whale bones or big tusks of something. And this is, again, this is a spoiler show, so this is a spoiler for the very beginning, the first episode, but most of the descriptions get up to this point. The boy decides to go find the people who have left the village. He stayed behind to care for some family members who have since passed on. And they went seeking a better life because it's, cold and snowy and Arctic. And he goes to try to find them, and things don't go really well. And he ultimately winds up getting seriously wounded by accident. He's not attacked by anything. And winds up seriously injured, then I guess would be the appropriate word, and winds up going back to the hut where, again, big spoilers, he dies. And the wolf realizes it can take on the form of the boy. And that's the main form that we see. This is the boy alive with the wolf, which is his pet named Joanna, but not really the wolf. It's whatever this thing is in Joanna's form as they're setting out. And that form there of the white-haired boy is pretty much his default form throughout the rest of the series. You will find out that he's able to take on the form of anybody that he's very close to who dies near his presence. Which gives you a sense of kind of what the show's tone is like. People die a lot. Badly, some cases. In most cases, really. And that allows this character, who is given the name Fushi, to take on their form. I forgot to say hello to people in the chat already. Love, hello. I'm going to say it's just love because the punctuation marks around it, I don't know how you pronounce that. Leonardo, whatever you said, it's been retracted, so I don't know, but welcome to the show. And take a quick gander around, see if we've got anybody else in the other chats. Nobody that I can see. So the first 10 episodes, the first cour, the first half of the first season, is absolutely amazing. The world that they explore is fantastic. Discovering what this entity is that is eventually given the name Fushi, and what it can do, how it learns about the world and about living things, is amazing. Up until you do get some narration throughout the course of the first season and the first 7 episodes, a little bit from mostly opening and closing stuff that sort of just wraps things up, from the entity, which they apparently call the Beholder in the English translation, that put the thing, which is now called Fushi, on this planet or on this world. Which doesn't appear to necessarily be an exact analog to older Earth. It's hard to say, because there are things. One of the things Fushi encounters is a gigantic, essentially polar bear, except it's living in a forested part of the world. Um, that the people in the area worship. I'm trying to get its name again. Oniguma. Um, and that's clearly like nothing that existed anywhere that I know of. You know, on this world. So whatever this isn't just sort of an older period, hundreds, maybe thousands of years prior to modern day on Earth. I don't think. It seems to be somewhere else. Um, but the rest of the series is about Fushi encountering other people and learning about other people and other cultures and so on, in ways that are good, enjoyable, fun, and most often than not tragic and bad. Um, and when the beholder shows up and basically explains to Fushi that there are things in this world that are trying to get him, to kill him, or stop him from his mission, and his mission is apparently to gather knowledge about the world, about everything, about the people in it, and so on. And he does that by essentially becoming these things. So, he is a sort of like a living library of information about this world that can take on the form of anything in this world if he has an emotional, what they call it, he's stimulated by its death, basically. So the story takes him from a primitive society where he meets a little girl named March to a slightly more advanced sort of medieval-esque or pre-medieval-esque warrior society that actually worships Oniguma, the giant bear, and where he meets a warrior of this particular group, named Hayase. That's her there, who is very high up in whatever. She is in command of all of these warriors around her, and many, many more. When throughout the course of this, when Hayase ultimately winds up being responsible for the little girl you're seeing in the picture there, March, and again, spoilers, for March's death, which of course allows Fushi to turn into March if he needs to or wants to. Fushi kind of loses it and turns into. I didn't grab a picture of the bear. That was silly of me. Turns into Oniguma and hunts her down through the town, the village that she lives in, and just destroys her. It's left unclear as whether or not she's dead, but she is slashed to ribbons right down the front and bleeding like crazy. And that Fushi winds up moving on because he's at this point starting to develop emotions. He's very distraught or confused by what's going on and his feelings about March's death. And the story then moves on to other places. He meets this old woman, sort of in the story of March and Hayase, he meets this old woman, Pioran, who becomes very important throughout all the rest of the first season anyway. That sort of accompanies him, and he winds up going to her previous homeland because she's not in where she was born and raised, and that homeland is Takanaha, it's called, and that's where they meet Gugu, who is one of the most interesting, weird and funny characters in any anime. And this society is even a little bit more developed, as you can see by the sort of architecture around. It would be, Renaissance-esque maybe, except obviously not, in any way, shape, or form European. It's still very, very Asian, probably Japanese culture. All sorts of things happen with Gugu and his relationship with Fushi and and the people around him and so on. ultimately leading to essentially the very last shot of episode 10 is this. Fushi has not transformed into any other thing except the boy for 4 years. And in that 4 years, he grows up into a later teenager, as does Gugu, who is jacked as hell, as you can tell. And it's really interesting that they leave off at this point, and then pick it right up with finishing out Gugu's story, and Gugu, these creatures that are after him. So when we did our first Anime Octane show about this, it was only 3 episodes in, so these creatures hadn't been introduced. They come in episode 7, I think. And they can create forms based out of natural things. The first time you see them, they create things out of trees. So they look like people, but they're trees. But they have all sorts of powers, so they can shoot out tree-like tendrils and so on. If they hit Fushi, they absorb his memories. Well, not just hit him. I mean, if they pierce him and hold him down long enough, they absorb his memories, and he forgets about one of these things or people he can turn into. And that horrifies him. That's as you might imagine. But the beholder tells him that these creatures, which he has named knockers, are out to get him, blah, blah, blah. And, this probably doesn't play with anybody younger in the audience that might be watching the show right now, but, I'm sure it's still a thing. Obviously, knockers is slang for boobies or breasts. And so every time, the beholder or even Fushi or somebody else says, oh no, I have to leave because the knockers are coming, and 12-year-old me loves this. But, obviously the mangaka had no idea that there was a slang. It's not spelled the same way, and had no idea that there was a slang that sounded like that. By the way, the mangaka, Oima Yoshitoki, is really only known for 2 things. It is this manga, which is currently ongoing, and as a mangaka, she writes it and draws it. And the art in the manga is really... The animators did a very good job of capturing the look of the characters and the feel of the manga. I'll give them that. But she's also known for A Silent Voice, which was a manga that ran 2013 through 2014, and it was turned into an amazing movie. So when I saw that this was based on another work by this mangaka, I thought, okay, this is probably going to be pretty good and pretty emotional. And sure enough, those first 6-7 episodes will just rip your heart out. I mean, all the feels. As somebody once said, it's like, yeah, this guy took lessons from George R.R. Martin. It's like, well, guess what? Don't get used to that person. They're going to die. So... knowing that this mangaka has made such brilliant work, and then being so previously with A Silent Voice, and then so blown away by the first cour of this series, when it starts up into the second cour, so episode 11 and 12 are, okay. It, like I said, it ends Gugu's story, and it puts Fushi in an interesting state. He transforms at one point to fighting Neckers. It's Neckers that not Neckers, knockers. Neckers are from Witcher. It's knockers that kill Gugu, of course, and now in this case they're able to take the form of big stone things. And since they had seen Fushi's Oniguma form, that's one of the things that they take. Basically, that giant bear, except made of stone. So, it ends Gugu's arc, and since Fushi transforms in an attempt to save Gugu, he is now back in his younger look. And he's no longer looking like, a scruffy teenager that has a little bit of stubble that probably should learn how to shave. And then episode 13 takes Fushi into this state where he is in a complete funk about the death of Gugu, who he had seen as a brother, that he had grown into something very much emotionally like a human being in those 4 years where he hadn't transformed. And suddenly, this brother of his just is dead. And so there are a whole bunch of ways you could play that that grief, particularly in a character who isn't really human, or isn't technically an organic being of any kind. And they sidetrack it sort of to get him into a state where he is forced to, well, he should be forced to deal with this grief and is ultimately forced to not, or decides to not, by having him kidnapped. So he leaves, and Piran decides. This is the old woman in this image is Piran, the one that was traveling with him to her hometown, and this is her hometown. She knows this old guy called simply the Booze Man because he makes booze, makes and sells booze. So he's traveling with Piran. They decide they're going to get on a boat and sail to just a different land, because they don't want the people in her homeland to be potentially at the risk of being attacked by these knockers, as long as Fushi's around. And they wind up getting essentially shanghaied, apologies for using that old term, onto a different ship that takes them as prisoners to Prisoner Hell Island, basically. And it's the dumbest change, the dumbest story left field twist. The character that they introduced to do this is a girl named Tonari, and that's her there. And up until the point where friends of hers die and she decides that she needs to stop being horrible to Fushi and maybe try to help him, she lies to him, kidnaps an old woman to get him onto the island to use his abilities as an immortal to win, and I'm not kidding this, a tournament arc. Now, granted, it's an island full of prisoners, and the tournament is to the death. It's literally, whoever wins and is the last man standing of all the people who want to enter this tournament becomes the ruler of the, people of the island, like anybody would want to rule these people. But anyway, and you're asking why are kids? Well, some kids are born there to, prisoners that are brought there, and they are not necessarily prisoners. They're called guests. They can't leave either. So he's being used by her. Lied to him. She lies to him nonstop. Every turn, literally just to manipulate him to get to fight into this tournament. And we discover at this point now that Fushi absolutely refuses to kill anything, because of the trauma of having lost Gugu. Okay, I get that. One of the first things he does, they get on the boat, they separate Piran and Fushi, and Tonari basically implies that, this is sort of a thing that has to happen on this kind of boat. Women go one place, men go another. Like, okay. He doesn't know what happens to Piran, but he gets thrown into a cell and branded on his hand, which of course heals immediately, and he yells out her name. It's like, oh no, Piran, and then does nothing. Does absolutely nothing. He could transform into literally anything he's been turned into. Now, at this point, he can no longer remember March, so he can't transform into her. She would probably be small enough to squeeze between the bars. But his transformation sequences we've seen, he actually, it's like bandages unwrap and rewrap, and those actually can move from spot to spot. he could literally transform himself back into himself through the gaps in the bars, turn into Joanna, who's a wolf, and scare the piss out of the guards. Or if I don't think there's enough room on, the underdecks of that boat where they were, but turn into Oniguma and just wreck house. He's worried about Piran enough so that he yells out her name and then just literally does nothing so that he can get to this island, because the story wants him to get to this island. And then does nothing as Tonari just literally uses him, lies to him at every turn, to get him to do what she ultimately wants, is to make him become the ruler of the island so that he can say, okay, you and your friends go free. Her friends are the friggin' Goonies. This is the most anime trope thing in this entire series. It is so cliche. I just laughed when they appeared on screen. It's hilarious. It's so ham-fisted. These are the Spielberg kids. Guess what? 3 out of the 5 of them die. These two, the two darker skinned ones, obviously, which is are very cool. They're not the ones that die first. It's the other ones. It just, that whole, the end of episode 13, and then everything on that island, Jananda Island, with Tonari, up until the big battle, the Knockers, of course, come to the island. All of the people that have been killed in the tournament and other things were just thrown into a big pit. And it turns out now one of the Knockers' ability is they can essentially move their tendrils into dead bodies and turn them into zombies. So then the story becomes, a zombie story. And they have to fight zombies. And the Knockers actually can do this, apparently, to living beings. They do it to 3 of the 5 Goonies, as I mentioned. The redheaded girl, the stocky blonde boy, and the girl with apparently a missing eye, all wind up becoming one of these, a zombie. It's just, and then in a show where it didn't require an awful lot of really complicated animation, but the fight scenes were really good and the anime is clean and excellent. They realize apparently at some point that they've got to animate dozens upon dozens, nearly 100 zombies shuffling around in the background, as they come out of this pit, and that's done with the worst CG I've seen in a long time. Well, that's not true. X-Arm was something that happened in the winter season, the beginning of this year. So, nothing was worse than that. But this is pretty darn close. Literally, there's no shadows as these things are moving along the ground. It's the worst compositing, at least. Let's put it that way, of a CG things moving across the screen with an actual drawn background. It's terrible. And ultimately, Fushi decides that he is in fact not going to kill. Despite the fact that 3 of the Goonies are killed in front of him and turned into zombies, it's not something he's going to do going forward. And you can. One argument that could be made is that Fushi is suffering from PTSD, which is why he is essentially just too afraid to do things. He's not afraid to encounter the Knockers and try to kill them if he can get them into a form that from something that's already dead. Even after they kill the 3 Goonies, he still refuses to kill them because they were important to Tonari. Oh, and by the way, somehow they become friends. Fushi and Tonari. No idea how. But even after she ultimately winds up kind of succeeding. So then the story, as if this isn't cliche and bad enough, the story brings back Hayase. You see, she's got scars on her face now. She comes to the island. We find out that she actually paid Tonari to get Fushi and Piran on the island. And her goal is to either get Fushi to win the tournament, or she's going to win it and basically run the island. She is completely insane, and in that insanity believes she is in love with Fushi. Once she actually defeats him in the tournament, because he refuses to kill her, and captures him, she attempts to R-word him. Again, second core of Sword Art Online. It's just, really? This was written, started in 2016, so Sword Art Online had been around for 8 years. I think. Close to 8 years. Before Oima-san started writing this. And, you take it there. That's where you go. You know the reaction online to that second half of Sword Art Online. Why would you do that? But anyway, in a show where the first half of this thing was so innovative, the pacing was not languid, but not fast. I mean, there were some exciting fights, but it was more an interesting story where you really wanted to see what was happening to these characters, good and bad. Hayase was an interesting character at that point. And then it just moved into, trope. Writing becomes horrible. Nobody... Now, granted, it's really hard to say because Fushi is not a human. He is not a living being of any kind. So it's very hard to say that Fushi would have a human reaction, but we're predicating his lack of willingness to kill on his human feelings that he developed, particularly of those 4 years where he and Gugu were essentially inseparable brothers. So if you're doing that, why is that the only emotional reaction you give him? He raged when March was killed, just stampeded through that village, killing Hayase's soldiers left and right, and thinking that he killed her. He's not going to feel rage. Hayase comes back. He finds out Tonari is forcing him to do this stuff. They kidnap Piran just to get him there. He's not going to rage? No, I don't buy it. So it's the show ultimately almost redeems itself, as I mentioned. And by the way, obviously we're not doing this as a normal things I like, things I didn't like, because I think it's mostly me ranting about things I didn't like. If you want to see things I liked, go back and watch that original Anime Octane episode about whatever platform you're on. It's on all of them. About when we first saw the first 3 episodes. Because my feelings then stay exactly the same up until about episode 13, the end of episode 13. And so if you watch the end of episode 13 and then skip the next 5 episodes, or 6 episodes, and then go right to 20, the last one, you're not going to really miss anything. I mean, you'll miss why he's, with Piran again, and he's worried about knockers, and he's, and what happens to Hayase at the very end. But really, you're not going to miss any good story. It's just terrible. So that's why I'm not doing this in the traditional format that I would normally do, because I kind of have to rant about this. But having said that, I still think what I like about this is mostly through, all but 5 or 6 episodes, the writing, even though that writing just literally disappears in quality for those 6 episodes. Just, drops down into the lowest tier of shonen trope garbage. Until the very final episode, and I found the final episode almost too difficult to watch. Not because it was bad, because it was good and got right back onto that, we're going to make this uncomfortable for you, honest, emotional horse that it's ridden for the first 13 episodes. He goes to a new land with Piran where he basically is trying to keep ahead of the knockers so that they don't get attacked. And with the help of the Beholder at this point, who's now a much more active participant in Fushi's existence, who warns them whenever they're within, I can't remember what the distance is, but it's like 50 kilometers or so. And they flee. They make sure that they get out of there as fast as they can. Piran, who is very old when this she first comes into Fushi's life, there's obviously that 4-year period where he doesn't transform, and then however long it takes for the whole Jananda Island stuff, she's really old, and it eventually gets to the point where Fushi has to carry her around because she can't stay on the donkey that she's been riding on anymore, and starts suffering from either dementia or Alzheimer's. And, poor me at 61, I look at a story where we get a really honest and brutal look at somebody failing their faculties because of dementia or Alzheimer's, and I'm going, I don't know if I want to watch this. But it's wonderful, as uncomfortable as it is. And ultimately, it ends in mostly a very interesting and an interesting spot. At the end of her life, Piran is able to see the Beholder, and thinking that he's a god, asks to be reincarnated in some fashion where she can be of assistance to Fushi. And he tells her, it's like, I'm not a god, and the nature of what I do, you will not be in any way the same entity that you were. This isn't, you're not going to be reincarnated with your memories or anything. You will be a different person. And she says, that's fine, as long as I can help Fushi. And it's clear that he does something. He ultimately winds up taking her spirit, once she passes away, into an orb, very much like what Fushi is. And that's the last thing he does. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. It will happen. Something will happen. And they've announced right at the end of that there will be a season 2. It'll be in 2022. I think fall of 2022, they said. And I'm very much looking forward to it, because that last episode made things just, right back to how high a quality the writing, from a story, from a character, from a dialogue standpoint, the emotional impact and so on, after just making me cringe for 6 straight episodes. So hopefully they get back on it. I've read, I made the mistake of, because I haven't read the manga, I wanted to see how far it deviated from manga, and almost not at all. This is a very, very accurate interpretation of the events of the manga, like beat for beat. So the story problems are laid, right at the feet of Oima-san, the mangaka, not the adaptation. This was her writing of this whole story arc with Tonari and Jananda Island and the return of Hayase and so on. And I made the mistake of reading on through the Wikipedia entry into the start of the next arc, which will be the start of the next season. And I'm not encouraged. Because this ultimately did not need an enemy, an implacable enemy, for Fushi to fight badly. For Fushi to fight at all, but then particularly for Fushi to fight badly, for him to just really suck at trying to save his friends save this world. He's terrible at it. Now, he was really good at it when he was barely a speaking, thinking being and turned into Oniguma and wrecked house. But it doesn't seem to make him a better person. Or let's say more effective at defeating the knockers as it goes forward. I stopped once I read into a few sentences and went, ooh, this is stuff I haven't seen yet. And I won't say that because, we haven't done a show, we haven't watched a show, and unless you've read the manga, you have no idea what's going on, just like I should have no idea what's going on after this season. So, I won't get into that. That would be too much spoiler, even for me. So to try to bring this back into a format that we kind of do, do I recommend it? Absolutely. Again, when it's good, it is so good that it elevates above so many other things that are out there. And I honestly, this year has had so much amazing brilliantly written anime. Odd Taxi is just outstanding. It's one of the best things I've ever seen. So I was so encouraged that it's like, this is another genius. This might be one of my very rare 10 out of 10 ratings on my anime list. Up there with like Cowboy Bebop, Steins Gate, so on. Nope. That just garbage tier Jananda Island storyline that takes up 6 whole episodes and a little bit more with the ending of episode 13 just drops it way down. It's still a 7 because of how good the first 13 episodes are and episode 20. So I would still recommend it. And maybe you don't hate the inclusion of really cliched, stereotypical shonen anime tropes into your anime, like I do, into an anime that has so completely eschewed those prior to the inclusion of them. And so your mileage may vary. You may actually get through this and say, hey, that was a solid 8, maybe even a 9. And that's, that's your call. I just really hated, the what seemingly to me was laziness of, let's bring in some of the really standard stuff that you'd find in just about any shonen anime in a series that had none of it up to that point. So yeah, I would recommend it. I'm giving it right now about a 7 out of 10. And I am cautiously optimistic about season 2 in the fall of 2022. Fingers crossed that they continue, that the story continues to be very interesting, and that they execute it well. But if they don't, it can go into the dump real fast. So that's it, folks. That is our show, Full Fat Spoiler Chat, for this week. We were going to do Transformers War for Cybertron Kingdom, and frankly, if it looked like I was going to be solo, and if I was going to be solo, there's no way I was going to watch all of that. The first episodes were just, it's a trilogy of short, like 8 episode, series. The first one was pretty good. The middle one was pretty meh. And based on just the first couple of episodes, this one was pretty bad. It was definitely a downward curve, and they kept going. So I decided to do this. So which means that Anime Octane going forward on Monday will undoubtedly be the Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 movie. And I know I'm looking forward to talking about that. I'm sure that others on our staff are very much looking forward to it. Then we've got Nerd Week Live next Tuesday, and again, I should look these up before I get into this, shouldn't I? Full fat spoiler chat for next week, next Thursday, is, he says as he rapidly Reminiscence, the movie with Hugh Jackman on currently running on HBO Max, but also in theaters. It's getting great reviews, and so I'm very much looking forward to seeing it and letting you folks all know what we think of it. So, with that, please, everybody, stay safe as you're going to cons like we are. Boston has reintroduced a mask mandate for indoor events, so we'll all be masked up at Fan Expo Boston. If you're coming, please remember to do so. Please stay safe, and please get vaccinated. We definitely don't need more younger people dying, which is what's happening because of the Delta variant. Everybody out there, and for the people that have marked themselves safe that I know in the New York area, because apparently they got really hammered by the remains of Ida. I'm glad you're all safe, and everybody else, please get the help you need if you did get any damage from Ida. I will talk to you folks in an upcoming show. When I'm alone, I almost always forget this, and that is, we do in fact have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nerdcaliber. Please, if you would, go check it out. If you're interested in helping us out, cover more cons, we'd love to have you help. We just have a couple of tiers. They're both really low dollar tiers. They're there not to, give you rewards to get you to contribute more and more money. They're there just so we can, if you're interested, give us a little bit of money to go to more cons, cover them better, and so on. So patreon.com/nerdcaliber. Having said that, good night, folks. Stay safe.